In this class, we're going to talk about the development process. So we're going to cover sourcing materials, sourcing fabrics, trims, all of the things that you need to use or looking to use in your product, sourcing and working with vendors, sample makers, factories, and the people that you need to develop your fashion product. We're going to cover the process of development. What are the stages? How to go about it? What are the things that you want to think of? Obviously, I'm going to share a lot of tips and insight how to do it the most effective way so it can save you time and money going forward. We're going to talk about how to work with vendors, because a lot of the relationship that you will have with your vendors is going to really determine how the product will come out. And I know it might sound a little weird, but at the end of the day, it's people working with people. So if the communication is there, if you figure out how to work with your vendors and they figure out how to work with you, there's a better chance that you will get the best results out of this relationship. The first stage of development would be creating a calendar and a budget for this development process. Because one of the things that you really want to make sure is that you're staying within your budget and you're able to complete the process in a certain amount of time that's going to get you to sell it when you need to sell it. One of the things that normally can happen if you don't plan right for it is that the development process tend to be longer than what you expected, and the budget might go over your budget, and all of a sudden you're not going to meet the deadlines that you need to meet, and as a result not going to be ready for your market. When I talk about creating a calendar for development, the way I would go about it is think about the end result, meaning when do I need my samples ready to show a buyer? And from that point, I will back up and start creating these other points that needs to happen along the development. For example, if I know that I need to have my product in market at the beginning of September, then I know that I need to schedule, for example, a photo shoot a few weeks before, create a lookbook and things like this. That means my final sample should be, let's say, be sometimes in August, the beginning of August. And then I know that based on that, I'm tracking back all the process of development and creating deadlines for when I will need each of the steps of the development. This way I have a calendar that I can work with. I can always kind of go back to and make sure that I am where I need to be and things are progressing the right way. And if not, then I know what the general calendar looks like so I can adjust to it. It's also helpful when you work with other vendors and other people that are helping you need to kind of be really aware of your calendar and when do you need things, when do you need certain steps of this development to happen, so nothing will delay the process. And the same thing goes for budgeting. It's either that you have a certain amount of budget to begin with, that you say, you know what, this is my total amount for the season, that's all I can spend on development, let's see what I can do with it, and kind of break down that number into the amount of product that you want to develop. Or if you have more freedom, then once you decide that I'm going to go ahead and develop that amount of samples, styles, for example, if I decided that I'm going to create a line that is going to have, let's say, 12 different styles, I know what each style will cost me as far as development, and then I'll create a budget around this. A couple of things to think of when I'm budgeting is things that sometimes along the way we don't think about them. We don't budget for them. So for example, shipping of fabrications and samples and things like this, this would be one of the things that a lot of times and a lot of designers don't calculate in. But if I'm buying fabrics from Europe, for example, it's going to be shipped into the US or shipped to Asia or shipped anywhere else that is not locally where the fabric is done and being distributed from, then there's a cost that comes along with it. There's a time that comes along with it. So I want to calculate these two into the calendar and into the budget. That gives you an idea of all these things that you have to really think of when you think about the whole process. If, for example, I'm looking at a product that is going to need to go from one vendor to another vendor in order to be developed, then I need to calculate the time in between these stages. So if it's going from a place that is dyeing the fabric and being shipped somewhere else to a place where it's being cut and being shipped to a place where it's going to be sewn, there's time that goes into this. This has to be calculated into your calendar. The other part you want to include is some extra time and extra money on your budget. because the reality is that things are always going to be a little different than what you plan for them. You know, sometimes you're going to end up spending more than what you planned for. Sometimes things are going to take a little longer than what you expected. Within this calendar and within this budget, you want to have room in case things will go wrong so it won't catch you off guard. One other thing that I would include in the calculation, thinking about how many rounds of development I estimate to have for each style. Generally speaking, I would most likely calculate 2 rounds of development. Meaning if I'm developing one style, I would think about 2 rounds of me sampling the item, fitting it, correcting it, sampling it again, fitting it again, at least 2. Now there's going to be styles that are after the first shot, it's going to be great. You're not going to have to put more time and money into. Some others will need maybe 3 rounds. So at the end of the day, hopefully it will balance itself. But if you give yourself the room and you calculate for at least 2 rounds, especially at your first season, you're most likely going to be okay as far as time and budget. The most important thing is really planning ahead, because one of the common mistakes that happens in the development process is if you didn't, for example, plan your budget and didn't plan your calendar and you just kind of go with it and see where it takes you, normally in this last stage of the development, when you start going and things are happening and you see product in front of you, many times you can get very excited about this. And you're gonna start thinking, well, you know, maybe I'll add another item. Maybe I'll add 2 more items. Maybe I can push myself and spend a little bit more. Maybe we can push the time a little bit more. Without even realizing, all of a sudden you stretched everything and you missed deadlines or went over your budget or hurt your business in a way that you really don't want to hurt it. Planning, again, should give you some sort of a structure, some bullet points to follow, and points that you need to meet along the process so you get to the end showing your buyer the things that you want to show them and show it in time. So there's 2 main avenues of developing a product. There is one option where you're finding a vendor who is able to do everything for you. In other words, they will be able to source the fabric for you. They will be able to do the labor, the patterns, create the samples, dyeing, printing, embroidery, any of these embellishments or other things that you need in your product. They will be able to consolidate everything for you and have it in one place and ship you a finished product. So that would be one way of working with a vendor. Normally, these type of vendors are vendors that work with bigger brands. Normally, they are overseas in Asia or South America or places like that. It all depends really on your local market. Whether you're in Europe or whether you're in the US or wherever you are in the world will determine what kind of resources you can use. For example, in the US market, when you go about production and local development, what ends up happening is that you will need to put together all these pieces together. So you will be the one who's sourcing fabric from one place. And then you're going to have to find a cutting room. And you're going to have to find a printer. And you're going to have to find somebody who's going to sew the garment. All of these pieces are going to need to be put together by you. They're going to have to be coordinated by you. The process is a little different. When you think about it, you have to go and source each of these places separately. Where if you go and work with a factory who's able to put it all together for you, you source one vendor and they could get it all for you. These are kind of like the 2 main avenues of development that you can go by, and then really a lot of it is going to have to do with your concept, your price point, what you can afford or cannot afford, what are the resources that are available to you in your local market and outside of that. Now that you have these options, you can look into it and decide which one fits your business model better. And we can go over them and kind of explore each of them to see really what would make more sense for your business. Where do you find resources? That's one of the main questions, and anybody, especially if they are new to the industry, are trying to find an answer for. There's different ways, and again, it really depends on what kind of resources you're looking for, what market and where you are located. Because in the US market, you might find specific resources that might or might not fit your business model. In Europe, there might be different resources. Asia might have different resources. All of that has to kind of fit, again, your price point, the volume that you're looking to do, the categories that you're focusing on. Some countries, some places, some factories will do one thing very well, but will not be able to do other categories very well. So it's up to you to know what do you need to make your product, and then go and look for it outside and source the right vendors for it. Here are a few ways for you to source sample rooms or factories. One of the main option is really to go into trade shows. There are around the world a lot of trade shows that are geared towards that. Factories will show their product there. They will show what they can do, how they can do it. They can give you an idea of, capacities and what are the things that they are able to do for you. So going into trade shows could be one of the biggest resources for you to find vendors. However, you really want to make sure that the trade show that you're visiting to find your vendors will have vendors that will fit your needs. There are trade shows that gear towards a bigger volume. So most of the factories, sample rooms, fabric places are all going to have companies that require bigger volume, that their business is really geared to more established brands, maybe to brands who can do bigger units and can do a lot more volume that maybe you can do at this stage. However, there are other smaller trade shows that are geared maybe towards a smaller brand, if that's what you are. Try to look for these locally, or even if you need to travel. Again, it all depends where are you located around the world. If I'll take an example of New York, New York is a big center of fashion. So obviously here we have the smaller trade shows, the bigger trade shows. We can kind of find trade shows that gears toward this market and trade shows that are geared towards this market. So it makes life a little easier to find a specific vendor for your specific product. For you to find out which trade show is the right for you, what I would try to do is go into their website or find information from them about the companies, the factories, the vendors that are exhibiting at that show. Once you get a feel of who's exhibiting there, you might get a feel of who is their target customer, and therefore understand if that is someone that is geared towards you, if they can do the things that you need them to do, if the volume that they offer works for you, and so on and so on. The other way to find vendors is by referrals. At the end of the day, it's probably the best way to get the vendors, because if someone referred a vendor to you, especially if it's someone that you know or trust, then there's a better chance that the vendor will be the right vendor for you. When you think about referrals, this can go from like a friend designer that you met and he or she is still working in the business or creating products, and they can tell you of vendors that they tried, vendors that they work with. Things that work for them might work for you. The other way to go about it is specific vendors that you used for something might have information and referrals to other vendors. So for example, if I source fabric with a fabric mill, I really like their fabrics, and I know that their fabrics are very suitable for the market that I'm going after, then I would ask them if they know of factories that handle this type of product. Most times, they might not have relationship with these factories, but they might have information and access for these factories. In other words, they ship the fabric to this factory, so they can tell you, here are 2 or 3 places that we normally ship the product for these brands, and we know that this is the kind of product that they're doing. Give it a shot. Give them a call, get in touch with them, and see if they can do your product as well. So referral is always something that will give you a heads up on finding vendors. In the same way, when you reach out to the vendors, if you have somebody who recommended you, it's going to be an easier way for you to get their attention and speak with them. If you say that so-and-so referred me to you and said great things about you, this will be a better lead way to have a conversation about your product with them. A couple other resources are more general resources. Online, the internet opened the door for us to do and find resources around the world. Go ahead and search online. There are a lot of places, especially when it comes to specific countries, where there's a lot of resources within this country that are all gathered in a website where you can kind of get a feel of each of these vendors. It's almost like a directory of all of these things. And you can then have the time to look deeply into each one of them, see their products, see who they work with, have maybe some sort of exchange with them to really see if they're right for you before you go and make an actual connection to go and meet with them. One other solution for finding vendors is industry books. In the US, there's a couple of industry books. In the list here, you can see some books. You can also see some websites that might have some of these vendors listed in. These books will have a listing and a directory of factories, vendors, sample makers that you need, and you can just go through them and see who fits your need and start the research from there. Many countries, many cities, especially if there's a big part of that city that is working in this industry. For example, New York again, there's a garment center. There's an area where most of the apparel industry is located in, and as a result, there's a kiosk that has a directory of all the places that relates to fashion in that garment center. I can go there and just ask for the listing of all the places in that area. They will give me a listing of fabrics, they will give me listings of vendors for sewing, for cutting, whatever that is. Look into your own city, look into your own country, and you will be able to find some resource like that who can share a lot of vendors, and hopefully you can find one within that. So now that I have directory, a list of vendors that I was able to find in one of these ways, where do I go from here? Here's how I would go about it, how would be the best way for you to source vendors. I would go through the long list of all the resources that I found, and then I'll go kind of deeper into each one of them, make sure that I kind of pull or kind of put aside somewhere between 3 or 5 of them that I really think could be a great potential vendors to work with. And I will go and within these 3 to 5 vendors, I will have my ratings of, this looks the best, this is a second option, third option, and so on. I will go out to them and explore the relationship with them, find out any information that I need from them, see if they're interested in doing business with me, see if what I thought about them actually makes sense. In other words, can they do the product that I'm looking for? Can they meet my demands as far as quantities, as far as price point? Kind of explore what they do to make sure that it actually fits my needs. Don't be afraid to ask for any sort of information that you think would be useful for you, whether it's names of other brands that they work with, more information about, if we're talking about a sample room, you kind of maybe want to have an idea of what brands they work with, because that will tell you what price point they work on. Or if you're looking into a factory, then you kind of want to have an idea of how many pattern makers and sample makers they have in their factory, because that will give you an idea of how much they can accommodate. You want to understand a little bit more about the machinery and the skills that they have in the factory. So I would maybe even put together some sort of a sheet where it has all the questions that I have that I want to find out answers for in order to see if this vendor is right for me, and send it to them, have them fill it in and send it back to me. This way I'll know, okay, they have what I need, we can move into the next step. The other thing that I would do is try to put together some sort of an idea of what are the terms that would work for you, whether it's payment terms, whether it's time and calendars, how you work, what exactly you're going to need from them. Send it there as well to see where they are. They might agree to this, they might not, but at least it gives you a point of starting. You will be able to really iron a lot of these things that you're not even aware that might be issues later on in this first interaction. So, when you send some sort of an evaluation form to a factory and they send you all this information, you can kind of see, all right, this fits, this doesn't fit, they accept my terms, the terms that they suggest I can't work with, is it something here that we can negotiate or not? Whatever the situation is, you can attack these terms at this point rather than find yourself later on, after you committed of working with them, needing to face these issues. With all this information that you gathered from these factories of vendors and with all the research that you did, there's going to be one way that will really make you understand fully if this is the right place for you or not. And it's when you're going to start having some sort of a working relationship with them. When it's just exchanging information, that's great. They might tell you what you want to hear. You might tell them what they want to hear. It's fine. It's normal. You pass that stage. The real stage to really see if this is the right place for you is to actually test out some projects with them. One of the things that I would highly, highly recommend to do is, let's say I found a sample maker. We went through this exchange. I know what brands he or she are working on. I know that they can do their price point, at least from that exchange. All these other things that I needed, they seem to have and able to provide. Let me put together 1 or 2 styles, put it to work with them, and see what I get from them. That will give you an actual idea of few things. One of them is how they translate your instructions and what you're looking to do, and are they able to really understand where you're going and do it the right way. And the other thing it will give you an idea of is the communication, especially if it's someone who is not close by. Someone, a factory or a sample room that is overseas or the next town. Somewhere where you can't just, go visit anytime you want, and maybe there's also a language barrier there. This part of testing 1 or 2 items will kind of give you an idea of what it would be like working with that factory. Can they actually deliver what they say they're going to deliver? They told me it's going to take 2 weeks to get a pattern. Did I get it in 2 weeks? And if not, maybe it's a red flag. They said they're going to do this and that didn't happen. Another red flag for me. They promised me something and they delivered throughout this process of testing. Then it should make you feel good that they actually told you what they can do and they can follow up. So, that will be the best way to really test them before you jump and just decide, I'm going to give 10 styles. You put 1 style out there, 2 styles out there, see how it all works and make a decision from there. Find a way where you have maybe your top priorities vendors to work with, but you always have some sort of a backup. If I tested something with, let's say, 3 factories or 3 sample rooms, there's one that really I was very happy with and the other 2 are not so much, and I decided to go with that first one, and I end up giving them all other 10 styles or whatever number styles that I'm developing, and all of a sudden something doesn't work. It worked out really well when they had 1 style. Now things that don't work as smoothly when we're doing more styles, you always know that you have some sort of a backup to go to. You have your first priority factory, and then you have 1 or 2 in the back of your mind that in case something goes wrong, I still can go there. More so down the road, if you, as we talked about, your line is going to get bigger, you're going to have more things to develop. If you know that you have more than 1 resource to go with, it's going to make life easier because you can then spread your workload between these places. A lot of times, even in that first run, it will make a lot of sense to maybe separate the workload between more than 1 vendor just to make life more easier and not put everything in 1 basket. Once you figure out a lot of the details with that vendor and you're ready to put things with them, or actually even at that point where you just had an exchange with them, especially if it was mostly verbally, put everything in writing. And make sure that if it's an email that you sent them or an actual physical letter, whatever it is, something that is in writing where both parties can look at, and this way you know for sure that the things that you discussed are there. Because one of the things that you don't want to happen is that you spoke with them over the phone or face-to-face, things were decided or agreed on, and then later on, there's nothing to back this up. Especially if you have a verbal communication with them, go back, put it all in writing, make sure that it's being handed to them, approved by them, so both parties are on the same side. If you are looking to use somebody who's locally or someone closer to you, I would absolutely recommend for you to go and pay a visit. Even if it means that you're going to take a day trip or 2 days trip or whatever that is. If it's a vendor that you really feel strongly about building a relationship with, making that trip, having a face-to-face meeting with them, seeing the factory or the sample room or whatever that vendor is servicing or providing yourself, meaning you see the space, you see the people, you get a sense of what the relationship is face-to-face, this will always be a much better way to go about. Obviously, if it's a place that is overseas, it makes things a little bit more complicated. But again, if that option is there, I would highly recommend to do that. A lot of you, I know, are developing product on your own. Maybe you started this whole idea of starting a fashion business because you did stuff for yourself and you decide, a lot of people giving me great feedback about it. I kind of want to go and make a business out of it. Quite frankly, this is how I started. I made stuff for myself. Down the road, I realized, I'm kind of good at it. People are responding to it. Why not have a business and do something that I really enjoy and love and have that as something that I make a living out of? If you're making this transition from doing things on your own, meaning you making the pattern, you making the samples, everything is done kind of by you or in-house, and at this point you're really trying to make a business out of it and grow this and really take this to the next level, then one of the things that you're going to need to face is, how do I now translate what I did on my own into contracting these services to other vendors, people and companies that I never work with? A lot of times that transition can be a little hard if you've been used to do things one way and now you have to take it into a different scale. However, a couple of things for you to think of. If you're doing your patterns yourself or did your patterns yourself, you really want to make sure that the pattern that you are going to give to a sample room or vendor to work from has all the details on it. It has the notches, it has the seam allowances, it has every type of information that needs to be addressed when they're constructing the garment, either on the pattern or a package that comes along with the pattern, meaning a technical package, a spec sheet. So it's not just a pattern that they cut, but something that kind of explain about it. Another thing that I would also try to give is a sew-by sample. So if you have made a sample yourself, it's going to be easier for you to show something that you've done for them to understand what are you looking to do, or how you're looking to finish things, how you're looking to sew things, or even how did you actually translate that pattern into a finished garment. Whoever is there in the receiving end will be able to go through this information and not have any issues understanding it. Even if on the other side there is somebody who's looking at this for the first time and haven't done garments before, you still want them to understand how this garment is being constructed, how your pattern is working. So always try to think of what would the person who's receiving the package be able to get from that package. Are they going to be very clear about every part, or at least the parts that I really think should get the attention? I want to make sure that they are clearly listed there and explained in a way that there's really no interpretation on their end. One of the most important things when you take a pattern, a sample, and you move it from one place to another, that new person who's going to work on it will not have any door opening to interpreting what the solution should be. Should it be finished this way or that way? Should it be sewn this way or that way? These things you do not want to give. You don't want to open the door for something like that. You want to make sure that everything is clear, the way you want it to be made. When someone is getting it on the receiving end, there's nothing for them to think. It's an autopilot. They follow your instructions, they follow your pattern, they follow the sample, and they get it right. And of course, the last thing is to think, how do I scale this up? If I was doing this on my own for all this time, and now I want to take this and contract it out to a factory and down the road make 500,000 more items out of this, I need to think about that part. I need to think about the production. I need to think how some of the details are going to be translated when they are mass produced. Think about the design, but also think about production when you design the product and develop the product. Sourcing materials. So you have vendors, you're sourcing vendors, you're in the process of sourcing materials as well. A lot of the stages of sourcing vendors probably going to be very similar to how you would source materials. So if we're talking about the resources and where to find them, a lot of it is very similar. Trade shows, online, friends, people from the industry who can recommend other people or other companies that provide this kind of things. These will make things a lot easier for you rather than just, go out there and try to see where I get these resources. You really want to think about, how do I use this for what I needed now, but I really want to think about the future as well. If I meet with let's say a fabric vendor, they showing me all the fabrications, it can be very overwhelming if I'm just sitting there and looking at everything that they have to offer. They might have different type of fabrics, and I don't need to go through all this. But one of the best ways for me to get this to be a lot more useful for my end, and quite frankly for them as well, is if I have some sort of a material, some sort of a swatch that I can show them, a reference. A physical reference will make life a lot easier for everybody. If I go to a fabric vendor and I say, I'm looking for 100% knit fabric, they might have 15 different options of that description. But if I give them an actual swatch, whether it's from a garment that I have, or whether it's from a swatch that I cut from a store, or whatever that is, some sort of a physical reference, they can feel, they can see, and they can tell me right away, well, this is what we can offer within this range, or we don't have anything that would fit this needs. It makes the process a lot easier. If you found fabrics that you like there, order headers. Most of them will be able to either give you headers on the spot or ship headers to you. So you don't have to make decisions on whether I want to use these fabrics or any sort of other materials on the spot. You can kind of gather headers and swatches from all these vendors, then go to your studio, look at all of it together, and decide what works for you. So the pressure of deciding on the spot is not there. It gives you a little bit more room to think about all these other things that you need to think when you choose the right materials for your product. Similar to how we spoke about when we spoke about the design process, you also want to think about how to use these fabrics. Meaning, can I use these fabrics or any sort of materials over more than one styles? What are the minimums that these vendors are offering? The price point. Price point, as we talked about, is one of the most important things. If I can tell the vendor that I'm sourcing with that I need to find, let's say, a fabric that within this price point, they will be able to really direct me to fabrics within this price point rather than just show me things that I might like and all of a sudden realize, well, I can't really afford this. It doesn't really fit my price point. Having this information in place before you go and look for and source fabrics or any other materials would really make not just your life easier, but also make the whole process a lot easier. One of the other things that I want to pay attention to when I'm sourcing materials is, what does the price include? In other words, for the most part, the price will only include, let's say if it's fabric, just the price per yard or per meter. If I'm sourcing something from overseas, whether I'm here in the US and I'm getting a fabric from China or from Europe or any other situation, there's a shipping and duty cost that is going to add up to the price. And I want to make sure this price either is included in it or is not included. Most times, the fabric vendors or the material vendors will be very clear about it and tell you this price is FOB or this price is LDP. FOB stands for freight on board, which means that you are responsible for the cost of shipping. LDP means landed duty price, which means the price that you are getting for them per yard or per whatever the unit is already includes duty and shipping costs. So these things can be quite expensive if you're not calculating for them, and they can affect the end price of your fabrics, materials, whatever that is, whether it's for development or for production. You really want to be clear about that. Let's talk about the development process and what it includes and how to go about it. Two different major ways that you can go about it. As we spoke, it really depends on the vendors that you're working with. If there's one vendor who's going to take care of everything, then the information that you're giving them might be a little different than if it's going to be with different vendors that every one of them is doing a different part. The general process of development is quite similar. It starts with really creating a tech pack with CADs and information about the design that you're looking for. Now, one thing to make sure is that when you work with a sample maker, a pattern maker, or anybody who is working on your development, one of the things that they will end up needing is a technical sketch. In other words, a lot of designers, when they design, they do fashion illustration. And although it's great and it looks awesome, and many times it's super inspiring, and the designer itself who illustrated it know very well how it's supposed to look, when you work with a pattern maker who's supposed to translate this into your finished item, that can be a little bit harder for them to understand the details. So what you want to do is put the illustration aside, that was the inspiration part, and dive into CADs or sketches that will have more of technical details. Where you can kind of talk about the stitchings that you need there. You're going to talk about certain finishings. You're going to talk about measurements, how things are actually looking in details. So again, there is no room for that pattern maker or this vendor to interpret things the way they think, rather than you showing them exactly what it is that you want, and they will follow that. It's going to be a better way for you to get what you need out of them. We're starting with creating tech packs, CAD, and spec sheets. The next step will be developing a pattern. A pattern maker will take the information that you give them. Now, one thing that will make life very easy for them is if you have actual references in hand. So technical package is great, but references, as I said, will always make things a lot easier because they can kind of get a feel that they will not be able to get from a sketch or a CAD. A pattern will be made, which is the second stage. Then from that pattern, a fit sample will be made. Whether it's a fit sample if you do apparel, or a mock-up if you do a bag, or any kind of other accessories. Once the pattern is made, there's going to be an item sample that is going to be made. We call it muslin when it comes to apparel. Some call it fit sample, some call it the mock-up, but something that can kind of gives you a general idea of what the pattern is. If it has the details that you want, if it has the construction that you want, if it has the fit, especially on items that are apparel, fit is very important. So before you go ahead and finish garments, you kind of want to just get a quick test of what the pattern looks like and if it's giving you the ideas of what you need. Once you have a fit sample or a mock-up, you'll test this. So if it's a garment, you'll put it on a fit model, get comments to it, see if it fits well or whatever correction needs to be done to it. The next step will be the pattern maker will take the corrections and the comments, fix the pattern accordingly. If you have a tech pack that you are using for this, you will update the tech pack. If you have a technical designer who is working on your tech packs, then he or she will update the tech packs according to the changes from that fitting or that are based on that fit sample or mock-up. The next stage will be making another sample. Now, that next sample can have everything in it, meaning it can be fully finished, it can be done in the right fabrics with all the finishing and all the details. There's no more guessing there, it's actual details on it. Fit sample, a muslin, a mock-up, for the most part is not a finished sample. It's really just to get an idea of shape of a body, to test some things on. It might not be done in the right fabrics, it might be in a similar fabric. For example, if I'm looking at details, pockets and things like this, I might just have the outside part of the pocket and not everything in it. If it's an item that needs to be lined, it most likely will not going to be lined. Really just something that can visually and physically can give me an idea of how the pattern is being translated so I can make corrections without really spending too much time and money and making a finished sample just to realize that there are things that I can caught a lot earlier. That's the fit sample, the mock-up. We go through the correction, a pattern's being corrected, we're making another sample, and this sample is being tested, fitted, whatever the stage that it needs to be verified with. This is the process for the most part. Now, if at that stage there are still issues with the sample, or there's fit issues or constructions or things that are still need to be adjusted, you have two options. Either you decide, you know what, the amount of changes that this item still needs might not be too much. So if I'm looking at the item, 80% of it is there. Do I need to really go and fix this 20% for that item? Or can I use whatever I have now? It's good enough to show to a buyer. It's good enough for them to understand what I'm trying to do. I know what are the changes and they're not really big. let's move forward to the next style. Or, no, the changes are way too big, I still need to go through another round of fitting, making corrections, and a sample. Now, this stage of fitting a garment, correcting the pattern, and making a sample is a stage that can be repeated, quite frankly, as much as you need. So, as I said, some items, after one shot, it's there. Some items might need 3 or more. If you already went through this process and through this round of steps 3 times, I would stop for a second to see, is what I'm trying to do realistic or not? Because you don't want to find yourself going over these steps over and over and over again, spending a lot of time and a lot of money for something that might not be worth it. This is really something for you to be realistic about it and say, you know what, I'm just going to drop this style, or I'm going to change the details because fighting it might never work. Another way that I would think about the process is that I want to start with items that I know are going to be a master pattern to do other styles and build other styles of. I want to start with styles that are gonna be blocks for other styles. So for example, if I'm on my line have 3 different pants that I'm gonna do, I might start with one of them and get the fit right there, and then it's gonna be easier for me once I have the fit to create the other 2 or 3 different styles, rather than work on all of them together and realize that all these changes has to be done separately on each and one of them. I perfected one. I know this is the general fit of what my pants on the line would look like. Creating the other pants will be an easier way to go. It's going to be less expensive, it's going to take less time, and it's going to drive you a lot less crazy, which is what you want. Now let's talk a little bit about these individual steps of the process, of the development process. So if I'm talking about developing a pattern with a pattern maker, one of the most important things at this stage is to be really clear about what you're looking to do. You want that pattern maker to really understand your vision, to understand your price point, to understand the fit, the construction that you're looking to do. You really want them to kind of get into your head and see it from your perspective. One of the best and easiest way to do this is by giving them actual references. Most of pattern makers are more technical than creative. Some of them have both angles, but a lot of them are more technical. So when they're going to work on your pattern, they might just follow specs or just follow technical details. But if they see a garment and they see a fabric and they kind of get a better feel of how it's supposed to be draped or how it's falling or the vibe that you're trying to create with your product, that will help them get closer to your vision than just looking at the sketch. References is key. Go into your wardrobe, go into stores, go into fabric stores, go into anywhere where you can find and collect actual references of fabrics, of colors, of items, of anything that you are looking to duplicate. Put them together so when you work with your pattern maker, you can show them actual references. If it's a pattern maker that you're working with remotely, then either take all these items, put notes on them, and that's something I like to do. For example, if there's a dress that I already like the fit of, and I want to base my dress on that fit, but I want to change the sleeve, and I want to change the color, and I want to change the length, or whatever that is, I will put notes on these points and say, the neck needs to be this way, the sleeve needs to be this way, the length needs to be this way, but I want you to keep that fit. Whether they're remotely or they're right there in front of you, once they see an actual physical reference in front of them, it's going to be a lot easier for them to draw a conclusion as to what they need to do. Another part that can be very crucial in that development stage, especially if you're doing garments, is obviously fit is key. That part, especially in the first season or 2, is going to be a little bit harder to get maybe. What you want to do is you want to try to say how I can make this process a little easier. Here are a few tips for you to think of. One of them, you really want to know what is the size range that you're looking to offer. So when I go into a pattern maker, you develop one size, you fit that, you perfect that size, and then before you go into production, you grade into the other sizes. This way, if there are mistakes or things that need to be changed, you only work on one size, you got it right, and then just grade it rather than go into each size every time and make these changes. So that would be one thing, to know what is the size range that you're looking to offer. It will also help your pattern maker understand how to build the fit of it, knowing what sizes you're trying to reach. It will also help you, and hopefully with their help, to know what is the size that I want to make the first pattern for. A lot of times what you want to think of, if I'm trying to go and produce or offer a line or a garment that is running from extra small to extra large, I'd like to find a size in the middle that would still look good on a hanger, not too big, not too small, that is not too extreme in the size range, meaning taking an extra small and then try to grade it all the way to extra large, or if I'm going even higher than that, might be a bit tricky. The dimensions of the pattern might change a little bit as you grade it up. What I want to find is a size somewhere in the middle, maybe a small, maybe a medium, where I can grade down and I can grade up. This way I'm not playing with the pattern too much and I'm not really disturbing the flow of the pattern and stretching it one way or another. Knowing your size range and knowing what size you're going to do your patterns will lead you to the next step of, who am I going to fit this on? Here's one thing that I would like for you to really consider. And I see this all the time, and it's been one of these things that create a lot of issues for a lot of designers. Fitting garments on themselves. I highly recommend for you to not do that. This could be a big problem for you without even realizing it. And I'll give you a few reasons as to why. As someone who's designing it, you really want to look at it from the outside. You'll be able to see a better view of what the item looks all around, rather than just from the front, or from the top, or from the side, or whatever you look at in the mirror to see how it fits. You'll get a 360 view of the item from a construction perspective, from a look perspective, from a fit perspective. That would be one reason to do that. Another thing to think of is using a fit model and not using your friends or family or someone that maybe they are that size that you're developing patterns for. And a lot of times, quite frankly, you might not even be aware of it. But a fit model, as much as it's a big expense, the advantages of using a fit model, that person, this is what they do for a living. It's like a pattern maker. A pattern maker, what he or she does, they make patterns. They know whatever they need to know about this pattern. They are expert in patterns. Same goes to fit models. And by the way, one thing to keep in mind is that fit models are not necessarily the models that you see on the runway or that you see in advertisements or in photo shoots. For the most part, a fit model is only a fit model, meaning they go between brands and they put stuff on and they know what to look for in a garment. They know what are the parts that the customer will need to feel. They can tell you and give you a much more professional information of what it is to be in that garment, whether it's the fabrication, if it's scratchy or not, if it feels good or not, can I put it on easily or not, does it fit me right? You'll be surprised, but a lot of great fit models who've been doing it for a long time, and I've seen this many times in front of me, they're almost become some sort of a pattern maker. They will tell the pattern maker, you know what, I need in the rise just a little quarter, or I need to add 3/4 here, or I need 3/8 here. They've been doing it for so long that they can make this process for you a lot easier than a friend who might not even know what to look for. You know, a friend or family member or someone that you know is not going to want to hurt you and tell you that, you know, there's a little bit of an issue here. They are so happy to just help you that some of the things that a fit model would notice, they wouldn't even notice or feel awkward to tell you. So you kind of want to have that objective point of view from someone who's doing it for a living and get information that will help your product be the best product that you can put out there. The other part is, because a fit model is someone who's been doing it for a long time and that's how he or she make a living, they're very well aware of what size they fit. They are very well aware of which brands fits on them and what styles fits on them. As a result, they are also able to keep their weight and measurements consistent throughout the process. Your friend might be a size small, but he or she, they're not fit model. So this week, they'll still be a size small, but their waist might be a little bit more because, they ate too much or didn't really pay attention to it. The next week, the waist is going to be a little smaller. Not because they did something bad, they're just not aware of the fact that this needs to be consistent throughout the process. A fit model, for the most part, is always going to know that this is one of the things that their profession requires, to stay within these measurements. When you need to take an item and fit it every time with corrections that made to it, you always want to put it on the same fit model so you draw great conclusions from it. Because if today the waist is small and tomorrow the waist is big and I make changes made on the smaller waist and I'm putting on my friends and he or she are now a bigger waist, then all of a sudden I realize, oh, I need to make more changes. But maybe you don't need to make these changes. A fit model can cover this for you and really give you an insight and a professional, objective point of view that you will never get anywhere else. Now, in case you decided to go with your friend or a family member, the only other thing I would say is make sure that you're using the same person all the time. You might have two friends who are size small. Just pick one and go with him or her. But do not try one item on this person and the same item next week on that other person. Because again, when you develop the pattern, you want to have consistent information. You want to have consistent feedback. Later on, once it's developed, yes, you can take that item and try it on yourself and see how you feel in it. You can put it on some other friends to kind of get feedback. That's fine. Realistically thinking, an item will never fit everybody. There's always going to be somebody that this item is not going to fit well on them. And that's fine. That's perfectly fine. In fact, when you look for your fit model, one of the things that you want to think of is, I'm looking at this fit model and does he or she represent my customer? Whether it's the size, whether it's the age, whether it's their body feel and body shape. I want to make sure that they're as close as possible to my customer. So when I fit on them, I want to make sure that it's as close as possible to my customer body shape and dimensions. There might be a situation when this item is going to look great on one person and not so good about another person, and that is fine because none of us look the same, none of us has the same shape, and it's perfectly normal. When you choose a fit model, one of the things that you can do is reach out to a fit model agency. Tell them what you're trying to do. Tell them about your product. Tell them about your competition. Tell them what type of garments are you looking to fit, and that you're looking at somebody who fits, many times fits for the competition, and if not, to something that is close to this, that fit this type of product. And they will send you a list, cards of all the fit models that they think might fit your needs. You can look through them and have them come for a go-see, where you can try some pieces on to really see if this is the right fit model for you before you go ahead and develop product based on them. A small tip, their card will have sizes, waist, hips, all these other things. I would still suggest to physically measure them. If you have a pattern maker with you or a technical designer with you, have them measure these points of measure on the fit model right there, because it might be slightly different from what their card is saying, and you really want to make sure that you're building your fit based on actual measurements. The process of finding a fit model can be by itself a good process for you to develop your product, because you don't have to decide on a fit model right away. You can look at the options, test things on some other fit models, and find the one that really fits your needs and as close as possible to the customer that you are looking to target. These next few examples are just examples for you to understand what a technical package needs to look like. We have here some examples of a garment, we have an example of a bag, and you can see that it has a sketch, a CAD, with information and details on constructions and anything else that we're looking to get done on these items. We have a breakdown of the materials that goes into it. We have spec sheets that especially when it comes to garments, by sizes of what do I need the specs to be, so a pattern maker can follow up and kind of see what are the measurements that they need to go by. And it also will then help us communicate this when we go into production. The factory will have something to follow. So a technical package that includes any kind of information that will help whoever is making this product understand it without any interpretation, as clear as possible, so you get the result that you need. So now that we have a fit model and we developed a pattern, we work with the pattern maker on developing the pattern, the next step will be fitting the style. One of the most important things is really your fit model. So we talked about this, you know how to find your fit model. The next thing will be is conducting a good fitting session. And many times in these scenarios, especially if you're doing it for the first time, it's hard to control how to do this because you have a certain amount of styles, you're paying a fit model, it can be kind of stressful to know, okay, can I fit everything in 1 hour, 2 hours, or however times I book that fit model for? Can I get all the information from them? Things like this. One of the things that I would suggest to do at this point is kind of have an idea of, for example, if I have 4 different styles to fit and I know that I booked a fit model for an hour, I'm going to divide that hour into a certain amount of time for each garment. Knowing kind of the complexity of each style, whether I will decide, okay, these 4 items will be 15 minutes each, or maybe some of them will need more time, some of them will need less time. But one of the things that I want to make sure is that within this hour, I'm fitting what I need. One way will be to create a schedule for that fitting session. The other thing will be I'll create a priorities, meaning if I know that I must fit these 2 items no matter what, then these will be the first 2 items that I'm going to fit. So I make sure that if for whatever reason it's taking us longer to fit, we still get what we needed from that session. The first fitting is really done with a fit sample or muslin, which, as we spoke about, is not a finished sample. So you are only going to look into fit comments, into general things, not necessarily about how the product is being finished. Which leads me to the other point. You really want to make sure, because you're paying a fit model and you have a limited time, that you address what must be addressed on a model in the fit session. If I need to look inside and see how the inside of the garment was sewn, that might not be something that I'm going to waste spending time on in the fitting session. I can do this before or after, right? I don't need the fit model for it. The idea is that I want to make sure that whatever I need from that fitting session, the details that I must see on the models, that is what I want to get from that fitting session. The other thing that will make your fitting session a lot quicker is speccing and checking the items before you put it on the fit model. So let's say you got the fit model scheduled for an hour. Prior to that hour, you or somebody else on your team should really go over that sample, spec it, make sure that there was no issues in the sewing and how it was constructed, because many times the pattern was done right, but whoever was sewing the product, didn't do a good job or missed a part or two, and all of a sudden the specs are coming smaller or bigger. So it's not necessarily an issue in the fit and in the pattern, it's an issue in the sewing. So when you put this on the model, okay, I know that these shoulders came out a little bit wider, or I know that the waist on these pants came out a little bigger. If that's what I see on the fit model, that means I don't have to touch it. It's just something I need to address with my sewer. Another thing that you want to have ready in your session is, and especially if it's an item that requires some sort of accessories to go with it. In other words, if I'm fitting some sort of a top and I know that it's going to be worn with a specific bra, or it's going to be worn with specific undergarments or any other items, whether bra cups, things like shoulder pads, things like this, I want to have these available, especially if it's the first time and I'm only fitting a muslin. But more so, I want to make sure that every time I fit this specific item, I will always have the same kind of underwear or undergarment or accessories that I used at the beginning. This way, my comments and how I judge the samples is consistent because I'm always using the same things. The only thing that is changing is the pattern. Another thing that you want to make sure you have in your fitting session are the tools, whether it's safety pins, whether it's rulers, whether having the pattern in front of you, things that are going to help you be reacting to the fitting a lot quicker without you needing to all of a sudden go and look for something and waste 10 minutes on just looking for a ruler, or opening the pattern and looking at some details while the fitting is happening and your fit model is charging you for just standing there waiting for you to look for information. Really get yourself prepared for that session so everything is in place so you can just go through it and get it done. That's it. The last part that I would make sure to have in my fittings is I want to have somebody, and hopefully not me, who's writing all the comments. I might be in the motion of just looking at stuff and things are going in my head and I think that I need to change that, and we talked about changing that, but when we decided not to change that, if there is somebody there, and usually it's the assistant designer or somebody else who's assisting you, who can just write down all the comments and at the end of fitting that item, go over these things and say, okay, this is what we decided. I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. We decided to do 1, 2, 3, 4. This way, everybody is aware of the changes. In case he or she missed something, this is the point to address it. In case there's a debate of what the change should be, this is the point where it can be addressed. The other point that these notes will help you is that you really want to be able to look at previous fittings and previous notes for fitting that same items in case you want to kind of track a history of that item. It might be a situation where you decided to change something in the first fitting and then you changed it and then it didn't work out and you changed it back. And the third session, fitting session, you look at the same detail and you're now thinking, oh, I want to change it back to something, or I want to change it again to what I did before. Looking back at the notes will kind of give you an idea of what was done and what worked. So this will allow you not to repeat mistakes that you already did. I always love to have some sort of track records of each fitting session, what was decided to be fixed at that session, and knowing that I have a history that I don't gonna end up repeating mistakes again and again. Who should be in your fitting session? Now, this is something that you should really pay attention to, because one of the things that I've seen around me and many times that happened, the excitement of having that first fitting session is great. And you kind of bring everybody that you know into a fitting session. Fitting session is not a party. It's not about that. It's about getting the right comments for fitting an item. And you need to be focused. You really need to pay attention to things there. And more so, it's the worst thing when you have 10 different opinions telling you 10 different things to do about it. You really don't want that. You want to have your technical person, whether you're a pattern maker or a technical designer, yourself, and an assistant designer. Maybe one other person. That's about it. Sales team, everybody else that might be interested in knowing how this item fit can wait till later fitting. Where the items are a little bit more down the road, then it might be okay to bring them into the picture and have them look at it, knowing that most of the changes were made already. One other thing to think about the process of development is that you really don't need to fully develop your product before you go into market. If I develop a product and it's 80% there, and I still know, I need to change the length here a little bit, or I'm going to change the buttons on this, or something really minimal, nothing that's going to affect the look of the item, I would then probably decide to just keep the item. It's good enough to show. Buyers will understand that the garment is going to be still needing to be fitted before it's going to go into production. It's normal to have. They can get an idea of what the item is going to look like, and that's enough. The point on this is that many times, as I said earlier, you might develop 15 different styles, but only go into production for 10. To go that extra step on each of these items, we're really just going to waste your time and money. If you know that the item looks good, it serves the purpose, people can understand what it is, good enough. Let's move on. I will fit this before I go into production. This way, when you go into production, you're really only fitting the items that are actually going to be produced, meaning you're spending time and money on things that you know you're going to be cashing on. Once you have the fitting done, you have the comments and the notes of what needs to be fixed or decided to be fixed, go over these with your pattern maker or your technical designer if that's who you're working with. Just go over the items, make sure that they are aware of the changes, that you two are on the same page, that nothing was missed. Maybe there's going to be things that you're going to be looking at again when it's not under the pressure of being in the fitting session, and you can make better decisions. It will be a lot easier to attack these things at this point rather than in the fitting session. If you worked on a pattern with a pattern maker for the first time, unless it's really not workable and doable anymore, I would highly recommend to keep the pattern corrections done with the same pattern maker who worked on that first pattern. Because different pattern makers work differently. They do things differently, they think about things differently, and a lot of times it's not as easy and straightforward to take one pattern and hand it to a different pattern maker and expect them to do the changes that you need. Many times it's a lot more complicated. That new pattern maker is going to have to spend time reviewing the pattern. Some of the things will make sense to them, some of the things will not make sense to them, and it might just create a lot more confusion, which at the end of the day will translate in more cost and time for you. If it's doable, and if you're happy with the pattern maker that worked on your first pattern, keep that same style with them. Make sure that they can do this and they will be able to kind of do the corrections in a lot better way than if a pattern maker who hasn't seen this pattern before will be able to do. Once the pattern corrections are done, you can decide then, do I want to see another sample? As I said, maybe the pattern corrections are done. I have the sample. I don't need to spend time and money in making another sample. It's good enough. Or, you know what? The changes are too big for this item. I really need to see it again. Let me go ahead and make another sample. That's a decision that you can leave to this stage and kind of depends on where you are. Obviously, you can always ask your sample maker, you can ask your pattern maker what they recommend if they think that another sample is needed. Many times, that communication with your pattern maker and a sample maker is going to make things a lot easier for you. So for example, after a sample maker made your first fit sample, or after they make the sample, always go back to them and ask them if there's something there that they think can be done differently, can be done easier. A lot of times they will tell you, no, maybe the pattern needs to change this way because it will make life easier for me when I make the sample. Same thing goes for pattern making. When you talk to your pattern maker about changes to a pattern that he or she made, go over other options of going about it. They might have other options to offer you of how to fix this or how to construct something that will be more beneficial for your item. So use this. Make sure that you communicate with them, and the more they know about your product, the more they know about what you're trying to do, the better advice they can give you. Here's some tips about the development process. So as I said, fit model, very important. Find a fit model that is right for you and stick to them. When you're fitting one item and you're fitting it over a few periods of time, make sure that each and one of them has a tag on it with the date and the number of sample that was done. So sample number 1 was fitted in this day, sample number 2 was fitted in this day. This way, again, if you need to go back and track what happens or how things changed in case you have a problem that is very hard for you to solve, you can go back and track the history of what happened. Salesman samples do not need to be fully developed. If they look good, if they give the idea, it's good enough. A buyer will understand that. Buyers, for the most part, do not try these things on. So you don't have to be concerned about that. More so, even if they do, you can say, you know what, that part is still going to be fixed. I'm going to fit this before production. So, don't worry about that. Worry about how the item looks when you present it. And the last part that I highly recommend, and I've seen it so many times happen, and I really would like for you to be aware of it, do not grade your items until you finalize the fit of one size. All you're going to do is you're going to take all the mistakes and the things that are not working on this size and grade it and implement it into all the other sizes. But if you have one size done, it's finalized, it's great, you're happy with it, then go and grade to the other sizes. And usually that part happens really just before production. To sum up this class, we talked about the development process. We talked about how to find vendors, how to work with them, what's the process of taking to really get to the ones that you like and evaluate them. As an exercise, go ahead and find these resources. Find a directory of vendors, find those 3 or 5 that you really like, start narrowing down, get in touch with them, and go through the steps that we talked about so you can find this first priority vendor and the backup vendors. The other part that I would work on next is thinking about what my process looks like and start create the technical packages for this. Knowing now who are the vendors that I'm going to use is going to help me understand what kind of information I need or should give to them. I would go and look for references. As I said, very, very important. A pattern maker can follow an actual physical garment way better than they can follow specs. So make sure that you have physical items that you can show them, that they can follow the fit from, rather than them trying to figure out what the fit is like. Once you create this technical package, you can go out to your vendors, show them the technical packages, and start the process. Always start with one first, make sure that you guys are all on the same page, and then move to the rest.